The heat struck him first. Not the fierce, dry blaze of a summer noon on the King's Road, nor the steady, radiant warmth of the bakeries that opened onto White Harbor's alleys, but a perfumed, cloying heat that seemed to clutch at the throat, laden with rot from the river and crushed flowers from silk-draped balconies. A heat heavy with the voices of 10,000 souls layered over the clang of hammer and cry of gull. Wind off Blackwater Bay carried tar, salt, and old smoke. The city lay before Eddard Stark like a tapestry lit by afternoon sun, banners upon towers moving not as leaves moved, but as cloth and men desired them to move. Above them all squatted the Red Keep, a mass of red stone and dragon's memory, its shadows falling long even in the hazy light. He rode through the gate of the gods with the dire wolf of House Stark snapping in the weak breeze, the boys of the gold cloaks calling to each other as they made way. The small folks' eyes followed him, some curious, some distant and shuddered, some with a glimmer of fear or hope he could not name. Beside him Hal Malin coughed into his hand. Behind them came the litter that carried Sansa and Arya, its curtains half drawn against dust, and the wagons with trunks and barrels that had somehow not been lost to all the holds, tolls, and small lords' courtesies between the Trident and this stone hive by the sea. At the base of Aegon's high hill, he found Renly Baratheon already waiting, a smile bright as the sun on polished steel. The king's youngest brother wore green silk, and a little chain of golden roses worked cleverly in their links so that the breeze stirred them into small motions that caught the eye. "You are late for supper," Renly said, with all the ease of a young lord who had never known a winter north of the neck. "But early enough for secrets." "Secrets are seldom a proper meal," Ned replied. He swung down and felt the relief run up his legs. He had slept little since the ford. "Your Grace." Renly's laugh was soft as he stepped near, close enough that only the nearest guards could hear them and those knew their place. "You know very well I am only a lord. My brother is the king." He offered a conspirator's glance at the Red Keep. For now, Ned did not smile. He had not come for jests, and he did not mistake Renly's levity for lack of sense. The young man's eyes were shrewder than his mouth, and when those eyes studied Lord Stark, they did not linger on the furs from the north or the wearied set of shoulders, but weighed and measured the man who had been Robert's brother once in all ways that mattered. There were lines of sleep lost at the corners of Renly's smile too. He only wore them differently. "Walk with me," Renly said. "Your household can see to itself. I had a room prepared for your daughters. The Tower of the Hand has been aired. This city smothers when it wishes to flatter." Sansa and Arya were led on. The litter creaked away with Jory riding to one side. Ned fell into step beside the king's brother as they climbed switchback stairs cut into the hill. Below them, the city sprawled like a living thing, the bay a glittering scabbard spread alongside. The scent of the river was strong. Far out a sail turned like a white fish's belly in the wind. "You did not come to talk of supper," Ned said. "No," Renly's grin flashed and vanished, like a coin shown and palmed. "You came to be hand, and we both know what that means and what it will cost. Lord Stark, my brother has always loved you. He loves wine as well and boars after. He thinks they are the same sort of sport. Kings may find they are hunted in turn," Ned said dryly. He paused at a landing, and the two stood beneath a carved arch where dragon wings had been worn blunt by 1,000 hands. Wind sang through the stone. "Say what you mean, Renly." "What I mean is that the Lannisters mean to eat the realm. They have begun with the kitchens." Renly's gaze flicked up toward the windows of the Red Keep. "They feed the Master of Coin his ledgers and the Grand Maester his flattery, and the Queen feeds the king's thirst with a cup her family poured. The table is set and my brother dines telling hunting tales." Jon Arryn choked on a bone and no one looked closely at the cook. Ned watched Renly's face rather than the keep. "You speak bold words in bold places. I speak them quickly because if I pause too long, there are a dozen clever men waiting to tangle our feet," Renly said. "You have not yet sat a single day in the council chamber. When you do, you will find Littlefinger smiling and Varys silent and Pycelle wheezing, and each will find a chain for your ankle. Before that, I would put a sword in your hand. I would be it if you let me." Ned considered the youth before him. Renly wore green silk and smelled faintly of rose water and the oil on well-kept steel. He had Loras Tyrell in his shadow and the Reach's gold by whisper and promise if not yet writ. He was not his brother, but there was Baratheon in his jaw and in the stubborn set of his mouth when he spoke of Lannisters. Ned thought of Lyanna's grave and how winter wind moaned over the crypts. "What sword?" Ned asked. "Not a single blade. 50, 100. Men loyal to me, and thus to you because I say so." Renly leaned closer. "When the time comes." "Time for what?" "To seize the queen and her cubs and put them where they cannot bite," Renly said. So light the words might have been tossed off as a jest. Quickly, quietly, and with the city watch facing outward instead of inward. "There is nothing the Lannisters can do if they wake with their claws clipped. And when my brother—" He broke off with a lift of his brow. "When the king next goes hunting and comes back with a boar's tusk in his belly, the realm will not bleed to death on the floor of the hall while courtiers argue the hue of the tapestries." The blood left Ned's face so fast he tasted iron. "You would speak of your brother's death?" "I would speak of what others plan while my brother drains another skin," Renly said, no smile now. "I cannot stop every cup that is poured. You can tell him to put aside his wine, and he will laugh and say you have grown old. You can watch him ride and pray to gods you barely remember. Or you can be ready for what clever men and hungry lions already ready for. I have eyes in the stables. Lannister boys oil the saddle girths and Lannister hands fill the skins. It needs only a stumble and a heavy fall. Are we children, that we pretend clever men do not use simple plans?" Ned breathed once, twice, like a man plunging his head in cold water. He had made vows, to his king and to justice, and to the memory of a girl whose promise had weighed him for half his life. It did not sit easy to talk of trapping a mother and her children, but a hunt well planned saved lives too. He remembered Robert's booming voice over a cup, of women and boars and war, and the way the bruise purpled along the king's cheek after the last fight with the queen. He remembered Jon Arryn's thin hand on his arm once upon a time and how eyes like a hawk's had grown dim before that last letter came north. "You have 50 swords?" Ned asked, surprised by his own voice. "I have more than 50 men whose own swords are not the queen's. Most wear no livery at all. The gold cloaks are the hinge." For a moment Renly's youth was obvious and then hidden again. "They belong to Janos Slynt. Slynt belongs to coin and fear. House Tyrell has coin. You have an honor that makes men fear to disappoint you. Between us we can buy him and bind him. Then when you stand in the hall with my brother's letter naming you protector, the watch will watch as you bid. We will not fail for lack of 20 good men. You would have me prepare to seize my king's wife," Ned said. Each word turned in his mouth like a rough stone. "I would have you prevent the realm from being cut apart," Renly said. "If I had my way, I would put a fresh queen with roses in her hair in Robert's bed and see him smile again, and the queen we have would go home to Casterly Rock to wear widow's weeds and rear her children far from courtly poisons. But I am not a child to think the world turns as my pretty wishes do. The queen we have sharpens her knives and says they are spoons. I will not wait to find out what dish she means to serve." They climbed the last steps. The courtyard behind the red keep's outer walls lay hushed under a weight of heat. A fountain hissed water onto sun-baked stone. Renly's men stood in the shade of a gallery, in green and gold and plain leather both, watching with a fox's stillness. "If I listen to you and you prove false," Ned said, "I doom the city to lions. If you do not listen to me and I prove right," Renly answered, "you doom the city to lions." He held Ned's gaze without flinching. "You are not the only man who loved my brother. Jon Arryn did, and he died. I would not see you die for honor when guile will save the same lives honor might. Let me do the dirty work. Your hands can stay as clean as a hand's ever are." Ned turned from the fountain and looked up toward the Tower of the Hand, where a square of linen stirred in a high window as Sansa drew back a curtain to peer. She would want a song of knights and queens. Arya would already be in some corridor she was not meant to find. He could feel the city breathing, a living place that would scream if pinched and writhe if cut and bleed for a long time after. "You will come to me tonight," Ned said at last. After the king has drunk and before he sleeps. We will speak plainly then. Until that hour, I am merely the man who just arrived. No one sees the fish that swims deep. Renly's grin returned and did not quite reach his eyes. You are a northerner still, he said. God's grant. Tonight then, I will bring a ledger with me. You will like this ledger. The master of coins ledger? No, Renly said. A list of men. That night, the city rewove its sounds into a night charm of dogs and the mutter of dice. In the Tower of the Hand, Ned stood at a table and traced lines on a map that had been copied and recopied so many times the coasts were more prayer than geography. He had a letter for Caitlin and another for Rob, and he had written neither. The candles burned fat and slow. He could hear Arya's voice from the adjoining room, arguing softly with Sirio Farrell. He had found the Bravusi fencing master that afternoon despite all the other needs, because he'd promised and because there were some debts a man paid even across a continent's weight of cares. Sansa had gone to the Queen's Solar with her septa and returned with eyes bright and voice breathless speaking Joffrey's name. He had listened and said little, as he always did when a daughter's hope hurt in a way he could not salve. Renly came as he had said he would, with Loras Tyrell a step behind him only long enough to see who else lurked and then peeled away to stand watch, as if he were a good-natured hound pretending not to be a hunting cat. Renly carried a roll of parchment tied with plain twine. He put it on the table and unrolled it with a practiced hand. Men who take coin from me, he said, tapping names he'd written in a neat, unadorned hand. Men who owe my friends. Men who hate the Queen. Men who were once in Jon Arryn's debt and would like to be again. Among them, gold cloaks. Janos Slynt is not a man to write his name on such a list, but he likes to see his future written in coin, and there is space always left in a man's imagination where coin is concerned. Ned read the names, touching them one by one. Captains of the Watch, sergeants with their own debts and loyalties, men from the Stormlands who had come south with Renly, men from the Reach who had come riding in Loras Tyrell's wake for no better reason than that a young lord made the city seem like a tourney ground. There were also names he knew, from letters Jon Arryn had once written in a stern, clear hand, and from the whispers that reached Winterfell even through snow. Varys's name was not there, but Varys never was until you found you stood where he had meant you to. You propose we buy the city watch, Ned said slowly. Renly snorted. My brother pays them in clipped dragons and old promises. The Queen pays them in fear and threats of a Queen's displeasure. I propose we give them what they want. Coin and certainty both. We do not own their souls, just their swords when the moment comes. Ned weighed a small pouch Renly set by his hand. It was heavy. When he tipped it back, the coins glowed warm as embers. Tyrell gold had a ruddy cast. Littlefinger will try to sell me the same watch for a different price, Ned said. He will sell you anything you ask for, and he will sell you as well if the buyer is clever, Renly said, with no heat in it. He will smile when the knife goes in. He has a taste for it. I will not lean on Peter Baelish, Ned said. Then he will try to lean on you. Renly folded his arms and leaned instead against the edge of the table. Ned, the king trusts you when he bothers to think. He knows he is a blunt instrument and you are what makes steel a sword instead of an iron club. I know something else. Blunt instruments are easily turned aside. We will need a point. Ned closed his eyes. In the darkness, he saw the long, hot corridor near the trident where Robert had raised his hammer with his whole soul in it and everything that followed. He opened them. Before we clip the Queen's claws, I must be sure there is reason to clip, he said. It is not enough to say she is a Lannister and that the realm smells of lion. I need truth I can put under a king's crown and not be burned when the crown heats. Renly's mouth twitched. You think I came because I like conspiracies. I came because I like proof. Tomorrow you will go to the Grand Maester and ask to see a book no one has read in 100 years. And then you will come to a street off the Street of Steel and meet a boy who has your king's look stamped plain on his face. If you wish, we can begin with the boy and end with the book. The order will not change the truth. Ned watched him a long moment. Then he nodded. Tomorrow. First the book. First the book, Renly agreed. Because books do not try to lie and make their eyes pretty. Ned slept little. He woke before dawn to the sound of Sirio's soft instructions and Arya's harder breaths. And in those moments he felt more Winterfell than Dragon's Hill. He met the sunrise in the small Godswood, where there was no heart tree, only smooth-barked oaks that shed slivers of gold to the wind. The city was quieter there. The heat was not. He knelt among roots that had never known a weirwood's face and asked the old gods for the patience to hold steel in its sheath and the strength to draw it when needed. When the sun had cleared the red stone merlins, he went to Grand Maester Pycelle and found the old man bent like a shepherd's crook amid shelves of dried plants and chained tomes. Pycelle's eyes filmed as milk when he looked up. He blinked a slow and oily welcome and croaked congratulations that dripped the way syrup does when it has sat too long. "The hand wishes to read," Pycelle wheezed, and spread his arms like a host. "What work can the Citadel bring to your wisdom?" "Lineages and histories," Ned said, "and the offshoots of great houses, Baratheons among them." Pycelle's brows climbed. It took the old man an age to climb a ladder and another age to waddle back with a book vast as a flat stone. By then Renly had come to stand in Ned's shadow, smiling blandly as if he were a curious boy rather than the king's brother in a room where he had no stated business. Pycelle tooted and breathed like a bellows and set the tome down with reverence. Dust shook from it and made Ned's throat itch. "Grand Maester Mauleon," Pycelle said, patting the cover as if it were a pet. "A work of great scholarship, some would say of little use, but where there is a question of a seed's fruit, there is much use in the seed's memory. So the Citadel teaches." Ned opened the book. The script was cramped, the ink brown as old blood, the pages flecked with age. He turned to the page Renly placed his finger upon without making a show of knowing where it would be. The Baratheons, Orys of Storm's End, bastard half-brother of Aegon the Conqueror, black of hair, temper to match, married to the last Durrandon's daughter after taking Storm's End with the help of dragons. The line continued, black hair and bright blue eyes recurring like a refrain sung many times. Lord Lionel, black of hair. Lord Stefan, black of hair. Robert, Stannis, Renly, each black of hair in their youth. Ned did not lift his head. He turned another page and another, and everywhere in the margins the same note scribbled. Black of hair. He saw a tracing of heraldry, the crowned stag in gold on black. He saw a list of bastards, a line that embarrassed quills, black of hair. The book had the weight of a hammer. It did not prove what he suspected yet, but it made the blow plain if the blow was to be delivered. When he closed it, the sound was like a door latching. "Curious," Pycelle murmured, his voice moist. "A fine old book. Does it console, Lord Stark, to read what was set down before we were born? The past is the only stable ground in such times." "It is a ground from which one can measure," Ned said. He nodded his thanks and took his leave. Outside, Renly fell in at his shoulder. "The boy is at Tobo Mott's," he said. "Littlefinger took Jon Arryn there once. He will offer to take you as well and then sell you the news of your own curiosity for a better price. We will go first." They went, not on a litter nor with banners, but with a half-dozen plain men whose belts had seen as much oil as their swords, and Jory Castle at Ned's back and Loras Tyrell at Renly's. The street of steel clattered and steamed like a forge. It was a forge. Sweat and hammer song were its canticles. Tobo Mott's sign was silver, elegant as a letter cut by a master's hand. Gendry met them in the heat inside, because even if he had not stepped forward, the eye would have gone to him as to a well-cut gem among raw stones. He wore a leather apron and held a heavy hammer more like a friend than a tool. The hair that fell in a black curl over his brow was no more proof than the line of his jaw, and yet all together they made something that reached into Ned's chest and set an ache there. Mott bowed and he spoke words to hide his discomfort at noble visitors, but it was the boy who looked at Ned and Renly as if not frightened by consequence yet. Gendry's eyes were blue as noon. Ned saw Robert's face at 17 and 20 and 30, laughing and bruised and tender when the song had ended and there was only a bottle and a friend to hear foolish truth. "Who was your mother?" Ned asked, because if he was to do this, he would not do it with Littlefinger's slyness or Pycelle's suet words. He would do it as plainly as he could, with as few lies as a hand might use and no more. Dead? The boy said, without shame and without adornment. She had yellow hair. She sang sometimes. Master Mott said she paid well for my keep. Renly's glance to Loras was unreadable. Ned let out a breath he did not know he held. You look like a king I knew, Ned said, and I am sorry for it. Gendry shrugged. A king does not come to buy helms. No, Renly murmured, but sometimes a king leaves them behind. They left coin on Mott's bench and a word of warning to keep the boy out of sight for a week, and they went out into the street where the heat lay like a hammered sheet. Ned spoke little. He did not need to speak. Proof by lineage and proof by face W. Air more than enough. The third proof would only be for his own conscience, and it would come soon enough because truth had a way of finding its time with or without men's consent. They did not go to the brothel where Bara cooed under a hanger of tinsel pearls, though Renly knew the door and Littlefinger's men watched it from an alley with well-practiced boredom. They went to the armory where Janos Slint's captains drank during the day when they should have been patrolling. Renly bought their time with his smile and the weight of his purse and never once disdained to laugh at a foul jest or toast a man's wit. He also sent Loras outside twice with a look, and twice Loras returned with men who nodded to Renly as one nods to a fellow conspirator. Jory Castle watched it all with the careful regard of a man who would allow a stranger to sharpen his blade on their whetstone but not to touch the hilt. That night, Ned went to the king. He found Robert with wine on his breath and a bruise on his thigh from a hunt 3 days past that had been, to hear Robert tell it, a battle with a beast the size of a dray horse. Ned watched his friend's eyes and caught the truth there. The beast had been large, the wine after larger. There was love in the watching and an old anger that had never died because it had nowhere to go and no name to take it. Tell me a thing that does not smell of worry, Robert said at last, when the first cup had been emptied and the second not yet poured. Tell me the wolves do not freeze their arses off at night in your icy castle. They do not, your grace, Ned said. They curl by the fire like men. He let the cup rest, unfilled. I have read a book. Robert rolled his eyes as only a man who had never read a book he did not need to sign would roll them. 7 hells, not you as well. When a man sits a throne, he is assaulted with ink until his crown runs black. What rubbish was it? How to plant beans in the vale or how to sleep like a babe. Lineages and histories, Ned said, and watched Robert's mouth twist. You and John Aaron both, Robert said softly, and something old and tender and bitter moved across his face like a cloud over sun. John loved his damned lineages. He found wives in books and died with one hovering over him, no doubt. You have taken his place in the council. You will not take his grave. I mean to prevent yours, Ned said. Robert chuckled, low and sad. You cannot stop boars with books, Ned.
No.
But I can stop lions with proof when the time comes.
Ned spoke careful.
When you next go hunting, do not drink. Robert laughed outright then, shaking his head, and clapped Ned's shoulder hard enough to hurt. When I next go hunting, I will drink your north dry. I am not a pup to be led by the scruff. Cersei has her needle in your ear already. Does she? Tell me tomorrow. Tonight, I will love you, and tomorrow I will curse you and call you my mother. Then tomorrow I will tell you, Ned said. He could not reach farther into the man without risking that he would do what he had always done. Laugh it off, make a jest of it, then do as he wished. He parted with a clasp of hands and a promise to sit the morrow's council early. 3 mornings later, the king rode out laughing, Lancel carrying 2 skins of strong wine as if they were holy relics. Ned had tried the day before to wedge caution into that ride and found his wedge splintered by a smile. The gods loved their jests. Renly saw him in the yard as the royal party clattered through the gate. Their eyes met, and what they did not say then was as loud as any order shouted on a field. What followed was swift. Ned called Janos Slint to a private hall and set coin before him and a future written in flatter words than truth often takes. He flattered Slint's wit without lying about it. Renly stood at the back, saying nothing. Loras sat backwards on a chair and spun a gold coin on the table when Slint hesitated. The coin rattled to a stop every time with the stag still facing up. It was a little trick Loras had learned with a file and patience and let Slint discover. Men like to think they have outwitted luck. When Slint left, he left with his hands sweat damp and the belief that he had taken what was offered without becoming owned. A man who believes that is easier to command than one who is entirely bought or entirely proud. They set men in place at the doors of the tower and in the galleries above the great hall. Varys found Ned in a corridor with a face like a tired crane and his hands folded in his broad sleeves. A careful man, Varys murmured, is sometimes like a careful cook. He spoils the stew by tasting it too often. Forgive a poor spider's concern. Threads tangle when too many fingers test their strength. I do not require your threads, Ned said. And yet, Varys replied with a slight bend of the head, you are already caught in some, my lord. I would rather see you struggle toward light than in toward flame. If the queen asks to meet you in the gods' wood, do not go. Ned's jaw stiffened. Why? Because you will not be able to stop yourself from telling her truth. You will feel clean afterward and then very dirty. The eunuch blinked slowly. And because if you do not tell her, others will tell her you have something you mean to say and she will guess it, and guessing sometimes hurts worse than knowing. I recommend to you the virtue of silence and the vice of speed. Speed we will have, Ned said and passed on. Cersei did not seek him. She sent for Sansa instead. Sansa returned with cheeks flushed with being noticed and eyes hot with tears she did not let fall. Ned did not press her. He did not go to the gods' wood. He did not warn the queen. He did not sleep while the king was away. The boar gored Robert on the fourth day, and Robert's laughter turned to curses swallowed in blood at sunset. They brought him home on a litter, his face gray beneath lamp smoke, the wound staunched and stinking. Lancel hovered with hands fluttering like thin birds. The queen's face, when the party returned through the gate, was carved from frost. She reached for the king's hand and he shook her off without noticing. Barristan Selmy walked beside the litter, his armor dull with dust and his eyes as old as the old man's eyes wearing the white cloak had ever been. Ned and Renly stood on the steps. When Robert saw them, some light came back to his face that no god could fake. Old friend, Robert rasped, when the others had been turned out of the chamber and the king's bed had taken him as it had not in some months. Write what I say. My hand is clumsy as a maiden's first attempt at sewing. Renly gave Ned the quill and the parchment and stepped back into the shadow by a pillar, his jaw a clean, hard line. The queen had at first insisted on being there. Barristan had said gently that the king wished to speak with his hand, and with that gentleness had forced the queen to watch herself walk away because some moves are made only slowly for dignity's sake. Pycelle fluttered like a dying moth, whispering cautions he did not wholly believe. Ned wrote as Robert spoke, and when the king said, "My son Joffrey," Ned wrote, "My rightful heir," and did not meet Renly's gaze as he did. Robert would not read it. Robert would trust it to be what he had said and think no more of it one way or another. Ned wrote quick and clean and laid the quill down when he was done. "Seal it," Robert gasped, and raised himself to spit weakly on the floor. "Gods, that boar. He was a fierce fellow, Ned. You would have liked him. Put that boy Tyrion on a boar and he'd stick like a burr." Ah. The laugh turned to a cough. "This is no way for a king to die." Ned held his hand until sleep took him, sleep that had the sound of a short time left in it. When the king woke again, he muttered of lilies and the smell of storm. Ned did not ask which memory his friend was in. He left the sealed letter with the king's signet pressed flat into red wax and carried news into the corridor where Renly waited like an arrow waits on a string. Renly did not ask what the letter said. He asked only, "Slint, ready," Ned said. Then when the king's eyes closed for the last time, "We close the doors and open others at our choosing," Renly said. His mouth was very pale. Robert died at dawn. Ned saw the light strike the king's face once as if the sun meant to bring him back by reminding him of the hunt. And then he was gone, taking with him a noise the city had always made without knowing it. Sound drifted through the open windows. Bells, soft, too many to count. A low shuddering that ran across roofs and down into cellars and into the bones of men. The smell of the bay turned sour. Ned closed Robert's eyes and felt a heaviness, and imposed order upon his own sorrow as he had upon battlefields and courts before. He gave orders. He did not allow himself to think of them as laws. He sent word to Stannis Baratheon at Dragonstone, swift word on a fast galley, with a captain whose son would be given preferment in the city watch if he sailed without sleep. He sent a sealed letter north to Robb telling him to wait and to prepare both to march and not to march because the world often required both. He sent men to stand at 3 doors. He had Renly send Loras to gather the men in green who had been loitering at inns waiting for a smile to turn into a command. He sent for Janos Slynt. He did not send for Peter Baelish. Cersei came to the great hall with Joffrey at her side, Tommen and Myrcella in her wake, and Sandor Clegane walking like a tall shadow shaping the air around them. She came searing and white, and beside her Joffrey strutted like a boy dressed as a man he had never met. The court gathered like crows. The White Cloaks came too, their numbers diminished by duties in each wing of the keep, and Barristan was with them, the old man's face carved from duty. Ned had the letter with him. Renly had the men where they could be seen but not counted easily. Janos Slynt stood off to one side with his captains placed like stones in a game board, their eyes sleepy and their hands loose by their swords. Littlefinger leaned near a pillar and smiled as if they were all actors in a mummer's show he had commissioned. A herald intoned what bells had the hour before. Ned stepped forward. He did not like the way the echo took words in this hall. It made everything sound like boasting. He broke the seal and read the letter Robert had sealed as if it were smoke. When he had done, he held the parchment aloft, simple and honest. Cersei moved as if a string had been cut. She took 2 steps up and plucked the parchment from his hand, and with a disdain that did not even need to be feigned, she held it over a candle flame until its edge blackened and curled. She did not smile then, either. She tossed it aside to fall in a small perfect arc and land smoldering. "You presume to rule my son," she said. "I presume to serve the realm as protector until the rightful heir is in the city," Ned said. He did not raise his voice. There was a murmur from courtiers who liked to repeat murmurs. "Lord Stannis." "Stannis," she said, and the name was disgust in her mouth. "My husband's peevish brother. Will you drag him here behind your northern oxen? While you wait, the realm will tear. The boy is king. Men will bend the knee to the king." Her gaze swept out. "Kneel." The word struck the air like a thrown plate. Men flinched. Some moved. And then, only because men had been paid and because men had been told to be afraid of missing their chance to be on the right side, the city watch stepped in a pace. Janos Slynt lifted his chin slightly as if to acknowledge that a horse had answered the rein. "Seize the queen and her children," Ned said, as if he were ordering a stable boy to put away a saddle. "Gently. There is a moment that stretches when men decide whether to obey. It grows thin and tight enough to sing, and then it snaps." The watch moved, some against instinct, some with it. The captains who had held Renly's coin moved first, and their men followed, and those who had not taken coin went where trained to go, into order. A ring of gold and steel closed, and Sandor Clegane's hand twitched toward his sword, then fell away when he saw Loras Tyrell's men where they had no right to be, on the dais behind Cersei, smiling almost apologetically for being so very rude. Joffrey made a sound like fury and like a boy who had cut his finger. He reached for a sword that was not there. Barristan Selmy took a step forward with no speed at all, and that slow step pulled half the swords in the room slow with it, because that is what true authority looks like. A white cloak that moves and air that changes its mind. He did not raise his voice when he spoke either. "This is the King's Hall," Barristan said. "If there is to be violence done, let it be at least honest." "There will be no violence," Ned said. He met Barristan's eyes, and for a moment the old man looked through the younger and saw the winter in him and nodded. "I have no wish to harm the queen. She is to be taken into honorable custody. The children are to be kept safe and apart from the court. Ser Barristan, I would have you escort them. Ser Aerys Oakheart will accompany Tommen. Ser Boros Blunt will accompany Myrcella." Cersei laughed then, a laugh like glass scratched with a knife. "You presume to command the Kingsguard. I presume to command men of honor. Ned said, and let the room hear the quiet. He did not look away from Barristan. Do you refuse to keep children safe, sir? You may refuse me all else. Something old and stubborn in the Lord Commander's face set like rock. He took out his sword and laid it on the tiles between them. The gasp that hissed around the room smelled like tallow. Barristan said very simply, I serve the king. Until the matter is settled by law, I will serve the realm's peace. Take them, Ned said. Cersei did not fight. She looked at each man as he took steps not of his choosing. Joffrey, who shouted and twisted. Tommen, who did not understand and held out his hand to Sandor until Ser Aerys touched his shoulder and turned him gently. Myrcella, who bit her lip and cried without sound. She watched and her eyes burned and did not water. When 2 gold cloaks took her arms, she went like a queen to a carriage under the hall and sat with her hands folded as if waiting for a seamstress to prink a gown, and no one in that hall who had ever thought her merely vain was fool enough to keep thinking it. Littlefinger stepped from his pillar's shadow and began to speak. Renly gave Loras a look. Loras's hand closed lightly on Peter's shoulder, as if he were a man greeting an old friend. He did not let his fingers slip from the mockingbird pin. Not today, Renly murmured near Peter's ear, and Peter smiled, wider and whiter and colder. That night the city did not sleep. It dreamed with eyes open. The Lannister households bunched like muscle and then relaxed again when they found themselves looking at blades on both sides. Jaime Lannister was not in the Red Keep. He had ridden out the day before with a small party into the Riverlands to answer small wrongs with large ones after Tyrion's seizure at the crossroads. That choice saved and doomed him in equal parts. In the Tower of the Hand, Sansa wept salt and anger because she had not yet learned that love sometimes presses a hand on your mouth when you try to cry it aloud. Arya climbed onto a sill and listened to the gulls. Syrio Farrell sat with a cup of watered wine and watched the blade of his wooden sword as if reading truth in its grain. In the morning, Ned Stark sat the council table and found men arranged like game pieces. Renly at his right hand, smiling thin as the edge of a leaf. Varys opposite, his voice all humble counsel. Pycelle damp and composed. Littlefinger where a shadow of laughter clung, though he made all the proper noises of shock and distress at the city's gossip. The chair at the head was empty. Lord Stannis has been summoned, Ned said. Until he comes, the peace is mine to keep. The peace? Littlefinger said, turning the word in his mouth. A pious word for a day when the queen is a guest under guard and her son is kept from using his chair as a stepstool. If I were a cat, I might start viewing all this as yarn to play with. As a humble servant of the realm, I must ask what you mean to do when Lord Tywin asks you where you have put his daughter. I will tell him, Ned said, that his daughter is innocent until she is guilty and that she will be kept safe as a guest, with the respect due her station. I will tell him also that I have proofs to lay before the realm of a matter of law that touches inheritance. I would have the law decide it. I will make no claim outside of lawful course. Varys' hands folded. And if Lord Tywin replies with horses, my lord? Then the horses will find the gates closed, Renly said. He tapped a small wooden figure, gold cloaks painted crudely, toward the carved walls of the city on the little board in front of him. And a fresh hand to open them. Ned did not love that talk, but he did not deny that Renly had earned the right to speak it. He pushed the board aside. We will send an envoy to Lord Tywin, Ned said. We will send 2. One to Casterly Rock to take the Rock Road, and one to Harrenhal if he has moved his banners east. They will carry letters for truce and for peace in time of judgment, and one will carry also an offer. An offer, Littlefinger said, as if tasting a new wine. Myrcella Baratheon to be sent to Sunspear to be a guest of Prince Doran and betrothed to Trystane, Ned said. Not as a prisoner, as a promise of good faith. The queen may choose the ladies who will attend the princess and a lord of her own choosing to accompany her. Dorne remembers the last time lions roared through their courts. We will give them reason to remember a better song. Bold, Varys murmured. Merciful, expensive, cheaper than war, Ned said. Renly tilted his head. And Tommen? Tommen will be kept in the Red Keep as an honored ward, with his sworn shield to attend him, Ned said. Ser Meryn will go with him when he goes to the September. He will learn his letters with a maester like any lord's son. The law will decide whether he is a king's son. A septon will teach him that law comes from gods and men both. Ned's throat tightened. Joffrey will have a different lesson. He is the queen's pride, Pycelle said. If you humiliate the boy, you humiliate her and call down the father and the grandfather. I do not mean to humiliate him, Ned said, and the thought of Sansa's eyes last night bit him. But he will not sit the throne. Not until law says he may, and law will not. He swallowed. Who goes to Lord Tywin? Send me, Peter Baelish said immediately with that same soft warmth. The spider's silk trimmed with a fox's fur. He likes me. I will tell him jokes and make him think the jokes were his. I will come back with a truce if one can be had, and if one cannot, I will come back with a story that makes it seem we wanted no truce anyway. It is a talent. Send Ser Barristan, Renly said. He will not leave the city while the children are here, Ned said. I will go, Varys said. I am the least likely to be returned to you piece by piece. Lord Tywin is not fond of such meat.
Ned nodded.
You will go to Harrenhal as soon as we know Tywin's banners have reached it, and you will carry a letter bearing my seal and that of the council. The other letter goes to Casterly Rock with a lord of the court whose name is heavy with neither love nor hatred. Lord Stannis will not love that you bargai. And with Dorne, Littlefinger said cheerfully. He is a man who smiles only at teeth. Lord Stannis will receive what law gives, Ned said. He will also listen to the needful when war is on the table and a city stands between a man and his relish for justice. Lord Stannis will receive more than law, Renly said quietly. He will receive a brother's advice, and that brother advises him to ride south with all haste or lose a city to me. The room cooled if rooms could do such. Ned kept his eyes on Renly and said, You swore to help me keep the peace. I did, Renly said. He did not avoid Ned's gaze. And I am helping, but I am not a maester with quills. I am a lord with men. If Stannis comes slow and Tywin comes fast, the city will be pressed between a grindstone and a millstone, and there will be nothing left but powder and sorrow. If Stannis comes and claims a crown, I will have to decide what color I intend for my cloak. If Stannis tarries, I will not let him make that decision for me. You would crown yourself, Ned said. I would not leave the city to men who think laws are weavings they can pull when the pattern displeases them, Renly said. The words were hard, but his eyes were not. I am trying to save what can be saved. If I crown myself, it will be because men need a banner to gather under, and they will not gather under Stannis until he is already there to be seen. Stannis is the rightful heir, Ned said, and his voice was iron. Renly leaned back, and for a moment he looked young in the way of a man who had not forgotten how to hear such iron and be charmed by it. Then he nodded. I know, he said. You will never say otherwise. I will not press you now. But hear me also. I will not throw away what we have gained because we cannot put a crown on a chair and ask men to imagine the head beneath. I will ride if riding is what keeps this city from turning into food for lions. I cannot promise to follow you if you do, Ned said. You cannot promise yet to oppose me either, Renly said, and smiled the smallest smile. Good. That is the honest state of it. He pushed back his chair. In the meantime, we will fortify the walls and feed the city, and pray for a wind from Dragonstone. News ran ahead of ravens. Tyrion Lannister had won his freedom at the Eyrie by praying to the stranger and then hiring a Sellsword who did not pray. He rode to his father's host with a man named Bronn who smelled of sweat and success. Tywin Lannister had put horses on the King's Road and torches in Riverland's towns once Ryman Fry had come coughing with his grievance about the imp's seizure and about the slight offered to Lord Fry in days past. Clegane's men swaggered along the Mummer's Ford. A miller's daughter learned what a lion's paw feels like against a throat. The Riverlands smoked. Lord Edmure Tully sent men to douse fires and found they needed more buckets than he had. Catelyn Stark left the area at last with a silence in her heart that had nothing to do with height. She had come to believe that the veil was carved of fear and mists both. The road south brought her to crossroads where news met and mated and birthed rumor before noon. She rode on to her father's halls, where she found her brother struck at once like a willow switches at a boy who is not nimble enough to dodge. In King's Landing, the days became measured by what clattered in the yard and what did not. Arya learned to move with her feet whispering on stone. Sirio's stick kissed the backs of her ankles often, and the lesson stayed. Sansa learned to braid a princess's hair from Myrcella's journey to Sunspear, and learned that sadness and duty can sit side by side and not speak to each other. She came to Ned quietly one night and stood in his doorway and said, "I thought I wanted to be queen." He had not known what to answer and found the answer was a father's arms. Cersei's apartments had their windows nailed shut. She had fine meals and thin wine and women who served her with hands that trembled and spoke to her in small voices. She spoke back to them kindly when she thought of it, because kindness kept hands from shaking, and hands that did not shake could carry a note hidden under a bowl better. She wrote a letter to her father that said what needed saying in half words and a smear of red wine. She wrote another to Jaime and burned that one carefully, for habit is a kind of comfort. Stannis Baratheon came on the 7th sunrise after Robert's death with sails black as a storm, and the quays of Blackwater Bay filled with men who had spent their lives with tar in their nails and ropes making scars across their palms. Davos Seaworth stood among them, wearing knuckles cut half away by justice and eyes clear. He wore no rich cloak. He wore his small fate like a new shirt, not comfortable yet, but well-fitting. Stannis himself disembarked as if he hated the shore for being there, and walked up through streets that had never been his to a fortress that had never loved him and into a hall where Ned Stark waited with a letter held between two fingers and a city balanced on them both. They did not embrace. They had never embraced in their lives, and they did not start then. Stannis bowed, an inch. Ned inclined his head a hair. Words then, and the weight of the need of them heavier than any flourish. "You claim the crown," Ned said. "I do not claim," Stannis said. "I inherit. My brother's marriage was a farce before it was solemnized. The issue born of it are not of his seed. The law is clear. Clear as written," Ned said. "I do not argue it." He did not look away. "I do argue the way. The realm has been managed into a cliff. If we climb it like goats, we will fall with goats' wisdom. If we climb it with grapnels, we may reach the top and curse the climb. I will give you the grapnels." "Speak plainly," Stannis said, though Ned already had. "You will be crowned," Ned said, "in the great September with the High Septon's hand upon the circlet. Before that, you will swear before the Septon and the gods that the Queen's children will live and be sent from the city unharmed. Myrcella goes to Dorne. Tommen remains as ward and is raised in honor. Joffrey is held under guard until the law has spoken and then sent as the law allows, which is exile to a castle, not death. You will send all three to places they cannot be a rallying point for rebellion. You will not burn the city to root out traitors. You will starve them of the air they breathe in plots. Meanwhile, you will bring the fleet into the bay, and you will send letters to the great houses not to bend their knee to you, but to send grain to the city and their hosts to stop those who come to pull stones down. We will hold. You ask me to let vipers live," Stannis said. "I ask you to keep your heel over their heads while you build something worth keeping," Ned said. "Kill a child, and half this city will belong to a mother's tears. Let him live, and half this city will belong to law, and the other half will be too busy eating to riot." Davos watched him. Stannis' eyes went to the smuggler and back. "I do not kill children," Stannis said at last, with an anger that was as much defense as declaration. "I kill men who use children for their shields." "Then say it," Ned said. Stannis said it, stiff-lipped, as if every word were a nail he did not want to hammer but must. The High Septon listened with eyes like bland grapes and hands that trembled a little more than usual as he lifted a crown. The crown sat on Stannis' head like a burden laid evenly on a man who had prepared his back for just such burdens all his life. Cheers came like rain on roofs, scattered first and then steady, though there were places where the drops did not reach, and those places marked themselves as surely as ink does on parchment. Renly came that afternoon as a lord, not a rival king. He stood at the back of the hall and watched his brother crowned, and when Ned went to him after, he said, "I will not contest him today." "Nor tomorrow," Ned said. Renly laughed and the sound struck stone. "We will see. My men prefer a smiling king. If Stannis learns to smile, he may keep them." He sobered. "There is still Lord Tywin. He will not sit at Casterly Rock and wait while we talk about laws. He will make his own law with his banner as his quill." "He is in the field," Varys said, materializing as if conjured by politics. "Harrenhal, my lords, stinks of a new hearth fire. Lord Tywin's banners float there, and he sends out 1,000 stings each day. He thinks to draw us to scratch where he chooses." "Then we will not," Stannis said. "He will come to us. He will not suffer his daughter to be a guest much longer." Ned exhaled. "Then we must turn guests into something more than chessmen. Myrcella leaves at once under the banner of peace. Lord Renly, you will accompany her as far as the Mander." "Gladly," Renly said, glancing toward Loras and receiving back a look like a song. "A ride in the country will do my temper good." "And Tommen?" Stannis asked. "Tommen remains," Ned said. "He will dine with me in my tower and with Ser Barristan in his. He will spend mornings with a maester and afternoons with his swordmaster, and he will be a boy who does not understand why men argue about him. That ignorance will be our best shield for some days." "Joffrey," Stannis said, with that flatness that at once avoided contempt and failed to deny it. "Joffrey will be kept in the Maiden Vault under guard and courtly habits both," Ned said. "Ser Aerys will attend him there as the Queen's man and Ser Preston as the King's. He will have songs at night and hunting stories by day and a window with bars and a view of the city he thinks is his. If the law says he is not the king's son, he will be sent away to be a lord of somewhere far and quiet." Stannis did not say good. He did not say anything that would have sounded like approval. He nodded once, and that was enough. Letters flew. The city ate. The walls were mended. Wildfire casks were rolled from vaults at Halene's direction and then sent back by Ned's order. Though not all went back because men said a war without wildfire was like a feast without spice, and Ned had learned that stopping men from seasoning is harder than preventing them from pouring the stock. He allowed the alchemists to keep a dozen jars for a last resort. He slept 3 nights out of 5, and on the other 2, he walked the walls with Davos, because the Onion Knight had no love of courtiers and no fear of telling a lord when a rope had frayed. The city sighed. The heat did not lift. Tywin came. He came like a drum. Scouts flickered along the King's Road, bringing back a beat that quickened each day. Jaime Lannister fell back from the Green Fork with his teeth showing. Rumors ran ahead of him that he had taken a blow near the trident, but men had always liked to tell stories of the young lion's wounds. He rode fierce and angry still. The Lannister host rolled in waves. Red and gold and steel, and a rumor of a trebuchet brought piece by piece behind a wagon train. They came not to starve the city in a long circle, but to break it like a nut. Stannis and Ned stood atop the Gate of the Gods and watched dust rise on a day that felt like a hand on a man's throat. Below them, the mud gate held a knot of wagons that had not made it in time. Women screamed to be let through and guards cursed and shoved. The air tasted like iron filings. "We have 3 choices," Stannis said. "We meet them in the field in front of the walls. We sit the walls and let them throw themselves on it. Or we burn the King's Road and the farms and pretend we are wolves." "We are not wolves," Ned said softly. His sigil fluttered above them and made the word feel like both faith and lie. "We will not spend lives for pride. They will expect us to sit the walls as if we are cowards or cunning. We will be both as suits the hour." Stannis's mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile that had died long ago but left a muscle that sometimes stretched and forgot why. "Davos," he said. Davos came with a chart twice the size of a man's chest. He set it down and smoothed it with hands that had lost their tips because hands sometimes must pay. "The Blackwater," he began, and his voice had a rough honesty that made men want to listen because it offered them no illusions. "The river curves like a sickle around the city. If Lord Tywin means to assault by land alone, he will have to split his forces to make use of the ground. He will bring a ram to the King's Gate and ladders to the walls here and here and here. He tapped with a knuckle gone blunt. "He may think to throw bridges across the river from barges. If he does, he will be making gifts." "Gifts we burn," Stannis said. "Gifts we sink," Davos said. "Fire is pretty, but it burns friends and enemies both in a wind. Sink them with stones chained beneath, and you make the river sing." "Wildfire?" Renly asked, who had joined them with Loras, sweat at his temple and hair clinging to his brow, and no trace of concern that anyone might see that he had been riding and sweating and was as mortal as the rest. "In the river, with a west wind, your grace," Davos said carefully, not raising eyes to the king's brother's rank in that moment. "You will cook the fish and perhaps the flea bottom. It's a spice better sprinkled than poured. Put it where a ram will be, and then let them pour their arrogance. The jars leak when shaken. If you shatter them under a roof before men reach it, they burn in the dark," Ned said, remembering a story from King Aerys' madness and hating that it was the one story useful now. "They burn," Davos said, "and lightning comes from the ground up, and men run away from it rather than toward it." "Do it," Stannis said. "We will not be the first kings to use old sins to keep a city alive." He turned to Ned. "What of the north?" "Robb gathers men," Ned said. "He does not yet march. I asked him to hold Tully men near Riverrun. If Tywin's tail sweeps too widely, he will find Robb's hand around it. If the tail holds close, Robb will keep the great houses of the Trident from fracturing." "You trust a boy," Stannis said. "I trust the men who raised him," Ned said, and thought of Ser Roderick and of the old words that Winterfell had taught its boys forever. "And I trust that his mother will put a bridle on his pride. I sent for her to ride to Storm's End." "Storm's End," Renly repeated, and for once his humor sounded forced. "You send Catelyn Stark to my old castle to tell our brother not to leave his walls? Is that service to Stannis or to old memory?" "To peace," Ned said simply. "If you and Stannis fight, there will be 2 crowns in the realm and 3 wars. If you do not, 2 wars and 1 crown. She is a mother. She speaks a language brothers remember learning at their mother's knee." Renly stared at him, then laughed. 7 hells. Send her to Mace, and she might have him eating from her hand as well. "Mace would enjoy eating," Loras murmured, low enough that only Renly heard, and Renly's eyebrow flicked in a private amusement. They prepared. The city put its breath in its lungs and held it. Men swore and oiled their gear. Stannis had the fleet set chains across the mouth of the river, not to trap an enemy but to make sure friends could not flee at the first heat. He told Davos to see food ration to the flea bottom in an order that did not look like order, so the poor could pretend they grabbed what they received by luck. He told the alchemists they would be given jars and a place to put them, and a sum when the battle ended, and silence until then. He went to the sept and knelt in a place he did not love. He did not look at the mother statue because he did not think the mother looked at him. The Lannisters came on the 3rd day of preparations with standards streaming and horns sounding. Tywin set his camp in a curve along the King's Road like a half-smile a cruel man gives when the jest is made at another's expense. A white horse moved in a small circle near the center, Jaime Lannister at ease. Beside the host gleamed a line of wagons. Ladders, a ram with an iron head shaped like a snarling lion, towers half assembled. The trebuchet came on wheels, a skeleton of power and patience. The men laughed. Some looked at the walls with calculation. Some did not look at the walls at all because thinking of a wall makes a man want to piss. Ned stood with Stannis on the battlements as the horn calls called back and forth like strange birds trying to decide if they were of a kind. A messenger cantered forward with a banner of truce. The watch opened a postern gate and let him in and up. He bowed. His hair stood in little curls from dust. His eyes were proud because men are proud when they carry threats that are not their own. "Lord Tywin says you hold his daughter," the man recited. "He asks for her return and for the return of his grandchildren and for the return also of all honor they are owed. He says if you do so, there will be no storm. If you do not, there will be thunder." "The queen is safe," Ned said. "So are the children. Tell Lord Tywin that Myrcella rides to Dorne under peace and honor guarded by lords. Tell him that Tommen stays as ward in love and law." Tell him that Joffrey is not to be harmed, but the law will name him what he is. Tell him that if he assaults the city, he assaults the law, and the realm will not forget. Lord Tywin says the realm is what he says it is, the messenger said. And that law wears a lion when it walks. Stannis's mouth hardened. Tell Lord Tywin the law will wear iron and stand on a wall then, he said. And if he wishes thunder, we will see who calls rain. The man left with stiff dignity. Ned looked after him and did not see a path that would not end in blood. He had chosen days ago to take the path that offered blood that might not drown them all. He thought of the feel of Robert's hand in his at the last and wondered whether the gods had intended men like them to be guardians of cities at all. He had been happiest when all he guarded was a boy wearing wooden armor in a yard under a gray sky. The battle began with noise because men always start with horns and drums. The stones do not begin until the chiefs have spoken. They spoke. The lions' heads roared with painted mouths. From the city a few horns pealed, less for bravado than for signal. Then the first Lannister wave came forward under ladders, and the first stones leapt from the wall's machines like righteous birds, and men under them rose and fell as birds do when the sky is suddenly full of hawks. Ned moved along the wall. He did not stand still to court the fate of a hero. He placed men where they slipped and put barrels where the wall's height needed bolstering. He held a boy's shield for him while the boy vomited and then put the shield back in the boy's trembling arm and told him to look at the enemy's knees if he was afraid of faces. Davos moved the other way along the quays, setting boats loose and then pulling them back by ropes. A dance meant to make Lannister archers miss and make courage fray. Stannis stood where men could see him. He did not shout. He did not need to. He was seen. The ram came under the King's Gate at noon. It had across its head iron spikes shaped into a lion's mane. Men chanted as they brought it, the chant pounding like a second heartbeat under the city's own panic. Ned watched them come. They hit the first time and the gate shivered, a great beast flinching at a bite. They hit a second time and the hinges groaned. Men ran jars down into the gatehouse's underroom and placed them where Davos had told them to place them. And EY placed them with hands that did not shake, not because they were brave but because fear has a lesson in it if a man listens. They sprang the charge the third time the ram struck, and the sound tore through the gatehouse and out of the iron teeth like a dragon under stone finding its lungs. Flame shot out through the seams of the gate and men staggered back with their beards on fire and their faces painted in a green no minstrel would ever describe as pretty. The chant died. In its place men screamed because men have to say something when they burn. Ned, Renly said, appearing at his shoulder. His hair was singed at one curl. You begin to convince me you are as cruel as the rest of us. I begin to convince myself I am alive, Ned said. He closed his eyes a moment. Call the archers down. That is enough fire. They beat back the ladders in 3 places, and in one place the Lannister men came up and got a foothold, and their Ser Mandon Moore held a stare with an impassive violence that would have made a poet's pen break if the poet had not used it to write an elegy for the men who tried to pass him and did not. In the afternoon, wagons moved toward the river. Davos had been right. A barge bridge is a gift if the river takes it. The Lannisters tried. The river took. Men floundered. Arrows fell the way a storm does. The water reddened in bright streaks and then muddied them back to brown. At dusk, a horse broke from the Lannister line near the King's Road and galloped along the line's front as if the rider wished to measure it for a new coat. He did not wear a lion's cloak. He wore his pride. Jaime Lannister lifted his sword and pointed it toward the Gate of the Gods, and his horse stamped and tossed its head and looked as golden and angry as he did. He brought his horse close enough that Ned could see him clearly. "Stark!" the Kingslayer called with relish. "Do you hear me?" "I hear a man who cannot reach a wall," Ned called back. It was the only jape he had in his cupboard. He was too tired to find the pretty scorn men like Jaime trade for play. He spoke anyway. "Do not be a fool. Go home." Jaime laughed, bright and hard and careless. "The last time I went home, a king died," he said. "Perhaps I should stay." He wheeled his horse away and Ned let him go. He would not sally out to put a sword in a man for pride unless it was the last coin left to spend. Night fell. The city stank of smoke and men. The first assault had been broken. There would be another and another after until one side learned humility. Ned sat with Davos and Loras on a tower step and shared water, the three of them sweating like men who had run a long race, which they had. Tomorrow, Davos said, they will bring the trebuchet forward. They will test the King's Gate again with a new head with less pretty on it. They may send men to swim chains across the river and pull them down. We will be there, Loras said simply, and in that moment Ned loved the boy because no game played behind closed doors could strip simple courage of its worth, and he had seen a dozen Northerners die because they had it, and he had loved each for it. In the maiden vault, Joffrey Baratheon paced like a cat that had had its whiskers cut and hated the way the air felt wrong. Ser Aerys read him a story of knights from a yellowed manuscript that smelled of dust. Joffrey spat on the floor and told Ser Aerys that knights were fools. Ser Aerys kept reading because sometimes a man can make duty into a wall between himself and insults and hide behind it. In another part of the keep, Cersei drank a cup of wine that had been watered and thought of wildfire in cellars that had been meant once for another king's mad dream. She thought of lighting the city to watch it show her truths in green. She did not do it. She broke the cup instead and cut her hand on the shards and felt something that was almost relief in the pain. At dawn, horns again. The trebuchet rolled forward like a patient beast and did its patient work, throwing rock after rock in a relentless sermon. Walls do not care for sermons. Men do. The masonry held. When stones struck, dust rose and men coughed and the river carried away echoes. On the third day of the siege, the Lannisters changed their music. Horns low, ladders in the night, a set of boats with the bottoms tarred and firepots for gifts. A ram at the mudgate because men think men from the muds will sleep longer. The watch did not sleep. The firepots fell and broke on stone where no oil lay to kiss them. The ram met a gate that had learned to be patient and set its own teeth braced. Jaime Lannister tested the line like a fencing master losing patience and putting aside school for rage. He found a thin place near a sally port on the river gate and made for it with a wedge of mailed men as point. The wedge bit. It might have gone deep enough to poison the artery if Ser Barristan had not been there. The old man's horse reared. His sword came down. Men in front of him died, and he did not hurry. He did not need to. Ned came up to the wall in time to see Barristan and Jaime cross blades for a count of 3, and he thought he had seen men practice and seen them fight and seen the speck where the two cross. This was different. This was music without a minstrel to hide behind. Jaime laughed even then. You are not as old as they say, Ser Barristan. You are not as wise, Barristan answered, and their swords kissed with honesty again. Then men pressed between them, and the wedge lost shape under arrows and boiling water from above, and they were parted. Jaime is a man whom fate loves, Ned thought without approval. He will die in some foolish place and make a story of it that will travel to inns and outlast those who lived more usefully. On the 4th day, Lord Tywin sent his envoy again, not to parley but to be seen. He rode under a white flag and showed them a woman with a baby in her arms seated on a cart tied near the ram. It was an ugly little piece of playwriting. He meant to see if he could make the city's men loathe their own archers. Bastard tricks, Stannis said, watching. He had a face that had learned long ago how to show nothing and sometimes forgot itself and showed something despite that learning. We will not fall to it. Ned's throat tightened. He had seen too many children where war walked. He kept his eyes on the woman as the ram rolled. When it drew near, a jar placed above and behind and far from any archer's blind cracked and drank and breathed green. The woman screamed, and the scream told a lie because the green went forward and down into the head of the ram and made the iron there tender as butter and then turned it into storm and smoke. Men fell away. The woman kept screaming because fear goes on screaming after it no longer has reason to, and the men with her cut her bonds and dragged her clear and fled. Alive. The city did not cheer. It breathed. At sunset, horns again, one different. Ned felt it in his teeth before he could name it. Not Lannister. From the west beyond them. A sound like a deep hound that had found a scent and would not be called off. The Lannister lines shifted. Men turned to see dust where no dust had been before, on a road that had no lions under it that morning. Riders came. Banners. trout and direwolf and the blue and red of Tully. Ned's hand went to the wall before he knew he had lifted it. He felt stone under his palm and understood that his son had not stayed as bid. Robb Stark came to war at 17 with his jaw tight and his eyes too blue and too young. And he came with men who had wanted to hold their bridges and had found instead that following a boy who wore a sword like he had always worn it might be less foolish than waiting while lions ate their lambs. He did not come with the whole of the North. He came with a river of men that had split and followed the eddies of rumor and need. Edmure had given him 6,000 and a stern look. The Blackfish had given him harsh advice and a flank. They fell on the Lannister tale without horns and with knives. Tywin Lannister is not a man taken by surprise in his sleep when he is on campaign. He turned like a man striking a fly with a proper tool. He turned and sent a third of his force to push back the Riverlands men and the boys of the North. He turned too much. Stannis saw it and did not grin. He does not grin. He said, "Now." And the Sallies went where they had been waiting to go, not to throw themselves on a line but to bite the rope that cinches a noose. They bit at the points where ladders had been stacked and at one wagon train that held meat and grain and dry straw and thus caught fire sweetly. Men fought because they were there and because once a blade is bare you must swing it until you die or until someone tells you to stop. The line moved troublesomely in 3 places. Ned rode down through a postern into a world that was moving. He had sworn not to ride out for pride. He rode out for timing. The gate behind him closed and the men with him looked like they wished to look at it again and could not because they needed to look at him. He put the old pain in his hip aside and moved his horse through sudden smoke. He aimed not at Jaime but at a banner he did not like and did not want to see at his wall. He cut through it with the men he had chosen for cutting such things. On his left, Loras Tyrell worked with a clean economy that made quicker work than Show would have. On his right, a grim wedge of Stormlanders swore under their breath and struck as if the oath were a hammer that needed rhythm. Jaime missed him again not because either man tried to avoid the other but because battles are like storms. You can walk out under them with the intention of getting wet because you need to, and though you will be soaked you may not catch the drop you reached for. They met in a rip of the fighting where a hedgerow had once split 2 fields. They saw each other briefly like men see mountains in cloud gaps. Jaime grinned. Ned did not. Then a man between them went down and a horse screamed and the cloud closed. At dusk, the horns changed again. Not Stannis's, not Lannister's, not Robb's, Riverrun's, and the phrase wearily practical sound, and from the south a note of roses. Renly had left in the night 2 days before with 1,000 men and had taken the Mander with the invitation the Reach sometimes gives. Wine, bread, spears. Mace Tyrell came as only Mace could, with cooks at a trot and banners that made bards imagine a harvest. He came not yet to choose a king, but to keep a city that held his sister's future from becoming smoke. His vanguard hit Tywin's flank with a polite savagery. Tywin pulled back not out of panic, but because men who know how to build houses know when a wall must be taken down to keep the rest from falling. He withdrew in a way that made poets yawn but saved the best of his army. He left ladders, a burned ram, a broken trebuchet, and a rumor of an insult to be avenged at a later date. Night swallowed the field. Torches moved like worms along Earth's skin. The city did not cheer until the gates were shut and the last of the horn calls died. Then it cheered as men cheer when they reached the top of a hill they thought would never end. The cheer did not gloat. It simply breathed and set a cup down with hands that no longer shook. On the wall, Ned stood with Stannis and watched the fires in the Lannister camp move back along the King's Road in slow order like stars returning to the sky where they belonged. He did not look for Robb. He knew where his son was, in the place between boy and man where boys burn like fresh kindling for causes they do not fully understand yet, and men try to be flint and steel to strike that burn into a fire that will not consume the wrong things. Catelyn had not yet reached Storm's End. The South was a different war. This one ended with the city standing. In the days after, King Stannis sat the Iron Throne and performed the dullest, bravest acts a king can. He listened to petitions. He signed writs. He ordered dead men burned and living men fed. He broke a lord's pride by telling him to wait. He did not delight in any of it. He did not have to. Ned served at his right hand and watched the city put itself back into its shape. He fed Tommen and taught him Syvas badly and let the boy win sometimes because victories are food. He sat with Myrcella before she left and told her stories of the north where the sea turns to stone some mornings and the gulls leave footfalls in frost and the world aches with clean cold. She smiled and thanked him and said she would write from Dorne. And when she rode out with Renly's green banner moving beside her and a dozen ladies with eyes that had been chosen for both kindness and observation, she looked back once, and the city loved her a little for that. Cersei came before the king and the court and stood straight with her hands at her sides and said, "I deny it." And for a long minute she looked only at Stannis. Then she looked at Ned, and there was something like respect in the hate. "Kill me," she said simply, without drama. "It will be neater. You cannot afford to keep me." "I can afford what the law affords," Stannis said. "You will be taken to Casterly Rock under guard and kept there. You will have a suite with a window and a locked door. If the rock becomes the lair of rebellion, I will level it. If your father makes peace, you may live to see your grandchildren wear different colors in a city that remembers you. The world is less dramatic than your thoughts make it." She laughed, and the laugh was not glass now. It was a real laugh, rough and tired. "I doubt it," she said, and turned and walked out between two lines of swords. Littlefinger did not leave the city. He did not get himself killed. That is the art he had that others lacked. He returned to counting coin and making sure that men believed he counted it well enough that they should not count it themselves. Varys left and returned and left again. His little birds chirping with news he never seemed to eat, but always had on hand to feed others when they needed to be distracted or saved. Pycelle coughed. Renly returned with a tale of feasts that had ended with Pike's Loras kept a table of maimed men and fed them in the yard and told them stories in the night. Jaime Lannister rode west with his father, laughing. He laughed when men tried to guess what would happen next, and he knew and they did not. He laughed sometimes at night when no one could hear him, and he thought of Barristan Selmy's sword and his own blade and the narrow seam between pride and despair. Tyrion rode too, less laughing, more thinking. He thought of a city that could have burned and did not, of a father who liked sons only when they fit into the armor he bought for them, of a sister who would be kept in a room with a window where the air would smell of salt, of a brother who whistled at night and looked up when he thought of kings. He thought of a hand who did not smile and a king who did not either, and a realm that might be made to stay in one piece long enough to let men live uninteresting lives. Letters came from the north. Robb wrote in a hand that had steadied with blood and days. He asked if he should come and kneel and pledge the North swords to a king of law. Ned wrote back that he should come when the harvest was in and pledge in a tent outside the city without banners. Then leave again the next morning. He wrote that war would come again because it always does, but that men are obliged to fill the spaces between wars with something better than sharpening swords. He sealed it and put wax on it and pressed his dire wolf into the wax and said a word that was not a prayer but might as well have been. Catelyn arrived at Storm's End and found Stannis' garrison thin and stubborn and Renly's old chambers smelling of cedar. She spoke with Mathis Rowan and with Garland Tyrell, who had a way of talking about swords that never made a man feel diminished if he had none. She spoke with Lord Estermont, who had the sea in his bones. She rode again to Bitterbridge, where Mace Tyrell sat like a mayor in a harvest fair and ate too much and talked sense when he thought it was nonsense. She told him a story about a child's hand holding a crown and a woman's hand pushing it away because it was too heavy and how both hands had bled. Mace cried and then laughed and then called for more roast capon. And in the end he did what he would have done anyway, which was to keep his banners in the field and send grain east. Winter did not come that year. Daenerys Targaryen in a city of red brick felt fire hatch from stone and a song fill the night that no one in King's Landing heard. Stannis Baratheon held court in a hall of iron, and when men complained of law, he gave them more of it and found that sometimes the application of the thing you believe in hardest makes the ground under you less secure, not more. Ned Stark counted casks of grain and counted men's heads and tried to make both numbers stay above a line. He felt older, and he felt, sometimes at night when he stood in the godswood that had no heart, that he was becoming something else. Not a lord of winter nor even a hand but a hinge.
Hinges rust.
He asked the old gods to keep him oiled, and even if the gods did not listen, they did not laugh. Sansa learned to sing a new kind of song, one without queens in it and with mothers and girls, and a boy who wanted to be a knight and never quite managed it and was happy anyway. Arya learned how to move through crowds without being seen, which is a better thing to learn than how to be seen on a dais and not flinch. Syrio told her so, and she believed him because the evidence of her eyes was in her feet. Tommen asked questions that embarrassed maesters. Myrcella wrote from Sunspear about water and about gardens that made a girl feel like a queen even if she would never wear a crown. Renly came to Ned in the Tower of the Hand one night with his hair damp and no roses on his collar. He poured himself wine and offered the flagon and did not push it on Ned when Ned refused. He looked out at the bay and at the far darkness where dragons had once flown. He said, voice low and without his usual flourishes, "I still think I would have been a better king." "You would have been a different one," Ned said. "Is there a difference that matters?" Renly asked. Ned thought of Stannis, of iron set on stone, of letters as spears and banners as blankets to keep the cold off. He thought of Renly's smile and the way it had convinced men to put swords where they would not otherwise have put them. He thought of Robert laughing and dying, and Cersei laughing and not dying, and a city that had not burned. "Yes," he said, "there is." Renly drank and leaned his elbow on the sill and said nothing for a time. When he spoke, it was without wine on it. "I will not fight my brother," he said. "Not first. Not until the lions come again and the realm forgets what color the crown is, so long as it keeps the rain off. When that day comes, we will all fight each other again because that is what we do. Until then," he spread his hands, "until then we will exist." Ned stood beside him and watched the water moving in the moonlight. He had once believed that after the long summer must come winter, but he learned in King's Landing that there are seasons that have no names and only moods, and that men live most of their lives in them. He could not say he liked this season, but he could say he would see it through. In a tower room, Stannis wrote decrees until his hand cramped. He dismissed a lord for bribery and replaced him with a dull man who would not steal because dull men are cautious and cautio. N is as good as honesty sometimes in government. He signed a charter that gave the city watch regular pay and a punishment for captains who shook down butchers. He sketched a plan for roads that would allow grain to move even when it rained for 10 days. He considered a petition from the faith asking him to disarm the alchemists. He wrote no in a large firm hand and then, after a moment's pause, wrote a second decree requiring wildfire to be kept in a vault under a lock to which 3 keys must be turned together, and he gave 1 key to the alchemists, 1 to the hand, and 1 to Davos Seaworth over the protests of half the court. He did not explain. He did not believe explanation improved law. He believed only execution did. Tywin Lannister rebuilt. He moved men west. He sent ravens that learned to fly around princes as if princes were mountains. He sent gold where gold cures. He waited. He taught patience to a house that prefers rashness by providing them with stories about the cost of rashness that even those who enjoy paying could understand. Cersei sat at a window that looked out on a sea that she had never learned to love. She watched waves make and unmake themselves and thought of a city with a sept, of a son who had been a crown for a moment in his mind, of a girl who would marry a boy in Dorne, of another boy who would wear fat and be happy. She smiled rarely. When she did, the women who brought her meals pretended not to see because they did not want to share it in case sharing broke it. Jaime Lannister dreamed again and again of a man in white with yellow eyes, and woke with a sword in his hand and laughed to know it had been only himself. Tyrion went to the Rock's library and ran his fingers over spines that had not been touched by hands that loved them in too long, and thought of writing a book called How to Live in a Kingdom Run by Men Who Hate You and then did not because the joke would have pleased only him and there was work to do. He wrote letters to men who liked to laugh in hopes of making them do what he wanted because he had discovered that laughter is a hinge too, and often better greased than honor. In the north, the first snows came late and the first wolves came early. Robb Stark sat with old men and young men and learned to listen to both. He learned also that sometimes listening is only the first step and acting is worse. He wrote to his father when he could and wrote to his mother when he could not and rode to hold the fords with men who made his age feel either very large or very small depending on what hour of the day it was. And Ned Stark, who had come to King's Landing with ice in his bones and honor he wore like a cloak, found that he did not have to remove that cloak to survive here. He had to mend it repeatedly. He did. He'd never been good with needle and thread. He became adequate. Sometimes that is the best a man can say. And in a city of red stone and green fire and gold cloaks, sometimes adequate saves lives. One evening as summer tilted at last toward a wind with something honest in it, he knelt in the godswood that had no god's face and closed his eyes and saw Winterfell's heart tree's red leaves moving. He could not say whether what he asked then was a prayer or a long thought. He asked it anyway, that when the next storm came, and there would be enough men left who remembered that cities are for living in and that kings are for keeping those cities from becoming graves. He opened his eyes. The fountain hissed. The heat had at last lost a little of its grip. He rose and went back to the matters of the day, which were a list of new watch posts along the mud gate, the appointment of a boy to a post in the kitchens because his father had died on the wall this week and there are debts kings must be made to pay, and a letter from Dorne that smelled faintly of lemons and said only that Myrcella liked to watch the water gardens at noon when the light made the tiles look like jewels beneath the water. He stopped a moment in a corridor where sunlight pooled and watched Arya cross it without being seen. He did not call to her. He let her be the shadow she had learned to be. Sansa passed later with a book she had not liked when her septa had read it and found she liked now. He watched her too and did not speak. He had learned this, among other unexpected skills, when to hold his tongue not as a man shirking speech but as a father who has understood that children must come to certain truths as one comes to a door, by walking to it themselves and putting their hand to the latch. The city breathed. The realm balanced. Somewhere on a step a horse whickered at a sound only horses hear, and a girl with white hair stroked a hatchling that could not kill anything larger than a rat. In King's Landing, a man in velvet wrote a story that made him seem brave and sent it to a cousin in the country. In a cellar a rat ate ash and died. Laws were made and unmade. Men slept and woke and sometimes did not. For a time, the kind of time that is both longer than a day and shorter than a history, the banner above the Red Keep was a crowned stag, and the man beneath it kept his word and his temper in equal shares, with a hand at his right who had learned not to warn a queen and to buy a watch and to drop fire only where it would burn what needed burning. No one sang a song about any of it that bards preferred to sing. But the people of the city, who did not often hear the songs sung about them, ate and loved and told their children stories about a summer when the city almost burned and did not, and about a time when a king's brother and a northern lord put stones on the wall where the mortar had failed instead of setting dogs loose to blame the cracks on. Those stories did not travel far. They did not need to. They were enough where they were told, and sometimes in this world, where wolves and lions alike sharpen their teeth on the bones of old tales, enough is a kind of victory.